My name is Hibarowa, and in today's video, I want to talk about what I think is the biggest issue facing the Europa Universalis franchise. Let's get right into it. If you've played EU4 before, think about how often you made it past the age of absolutism. Honestly, it's quite challenging to reach that point, but that's not really because of the difficulty of the game. As someone who's played EU4 for quite a bit, I notice that I often have a problem reaching the 1700s or even sometimes the 1600s. I'm not just talking about how much time it takes to play because of the performance issues. I'm referring to how boring and sluggish the game can get after that point. Well, while having this issue for myself, I did a little bit of digging and I found out that according to the achievement, Just a Little Patience, only 4% of players have reached the end date from the 1444 start. Well, speaking of percent, you should subscribe to the channel so that the percentage of viewers who watch my videos and are also subscribed gets a little bit bigger. Thank you. Many players on the Paradox forum and some of the Paradox subreddits have discussed the game's lengthy duration, but while some of the focus is on the start and end dates of the game, most of it is on performance-related matters. However, after playing my most recent save game, I realized that most of the people in the first camp are right. The true challenge lies in trying to encapsulate almost 4 centuries of history into a single game with a one-size-fits-all set of mechanics. Put that all into perspective, the first time that a real proper firearm was used in a battle was about 20 years before the start date of EU4, whereas on the other side, 20 years before the end date of EU4 was when the first steam locomotive was invented. I can't believe that a singular game spans all the way from swords and armor to trains and electricity. Alright, maybe saying "I can't believe" is being too dramatic, but it just doesn't make much sense to group these periods together. Really, that's just the point I'm trying to get across. If I sound too dramatic in this video, please forgive me. It is my first one of this type. But anyways, the mechanics in the 1500s that keep you from lobbing up into something insanely overpowered just don't make sense in the 1700s. When you take something like the French Revolution into account and how Napoleon conquered almost all of Europe in just 5 wars, it doesn't really simulate well with the current mechanics that stop you from doing that and are pretty realistic for the time period at the beginning of the game. In my opinion, the mechanics just don't work well when you have to translate them to almost 300 years of history. And while they do have the ages mechanics to somewhat help with that, it just feels half-assed and doesn't really do what it's supposed to. And you might be thinking, and I'm also thinking, that it's still fun to play the game, but you kind of just get stuck into the same cycle, playing the game until the 1600s and not getting to experience any of the mechanics afterwards.
I'm not having sex with you right now, Walter.
But you know, I can't really blame EU4. It's almost 15 years old, and honestly, I don't see a sequel like Europa Universalis 5 fixing any of these issues in a satisfying manner. For all my opinion is worth, I think that the most beneficial thing for the entire Paradox community is just not for Paradox to make a Europa Universalis 5. Now, that might be something controversial, and you might also be thinking to yourself, how is not making a sequel going to solve any of our issues? But it can help us avoid a situation like Victoria 3. From what I've seen online from the community, I think that Victoria 3 is largely regarded by the community as a failure. Maybe not necessarily a failure of a game, but just not a really good successor to Victoria 2. Alright, so while editing this video, I realized that I was being pretty vague here. What I meant is that, in my opinion, Victoria 3 is a fine game. It's just hated on because of how different and honestly worse it was from Victoria 2. Anyways, back to the video. And I think that most of it came from people expecting Victoria 3 to just be better than Victoria 2. But I mean, it's pretty impossible for Paradox to just create the nostalgia that Victoria 2 has just out of thin air. And what I think would benefit the community the most, and this is just my opinion here, is for Paradox to make 2 new IPs that cover the same time period that Europa used to. The first game could start around sometime in the early 1400s, and even if you want, in the late 1300s, and ideally it would start before the Ottomans really rose to power, so we could prevent it from spreading everywhere. And adding on to that, you could play as the Timurids right before Timur died. You could also play as the Hussites. You could play as the Spanish and try to do a reconquista of all of Iberia, or you could play as the Andalusians and stop the Spanish from doing the reconquista. You could play the 100 Years' War. There's just a lot more variety and paths to diverge from when you start at an earlier date. On a side note, this could also help add in mechanics that would make more sense in the early game, but pretty much make the late game unplayable, like a more dynamic trade system, more dynamic colony system, and a culture system that allows you to mix and merge cultures. Hypothetically, if this game was ever to be made, it could also end sometime after 1648, which was the end of the 30 Years' War and was a historically significant event. The second game could start off right where the first left off and end sometime after the end of Victoria 3. Coming up with differences between the two games would require a very skilled set of developers and would be hard for me to do as I'm not a game dev, so I'm probably going to come up with some stupid mechanics, but it would be a pretty boring video if I didn't state my opinion, so here goes nothing. The first game chronologically could be more focused on the age of exploration and the politics of the nobility inside these empires. Exploration colonization should be more focused on. I had an idea for a mechanic where there would be a power projection system where colonization can give more boosts and unlock techs that are exclusive to colonizers and new ways to make money. Also, individual colonies shouldn't just be a ticker going up from sending a colonist over there, but should also have options for you to choose, like building cities, building farms, building hunting grounds, and building lumber industry. There should be more mechanics like the 7 Cities of Gold that actually encourage you to go discover more and establish trade routes between your colonies. I also think that there should be a new naval power mechanic in which the size of your navy and the different techniques you use would play a crucial role in protecting your trade routes and actually affect how much money you get from trading. Also, governments in this era had large amounts of feudal lords or nobility. I'd like to see mechanics where you'd have to deal with individual noble families like in CK3 and maintain their loyalty and make sure that they don't try to overthrow you or challenge your succession. I think that the religious mechanics of Europa are pretty good as is, but I would also like to see more variety in how the Protestant Reformation happens. Maybe even a way to reliably prevent it from happening, like if you were to reform the church as the Pope. I think the biggest thing about Europa that needs to be changed if any sort of sequel comes out would be the trade mechanics. Trade and trade nodes should be dynamic and they should change over time depending on decisions you make as the player and that the AI make, not just always amassing in Italy. You should be able to negotiate trade agreements with certain countries and also make the trade wars worth it by having trade alliances. I would like to see something like the Hanseatic League be something that can happen in other places other than Germany, and also have more unique mechanics that would make it actually worth it to do anything with that. Trade companies should work more like colonies and be more independent, but not necessarily have diplomacy with any countries outside its designated region. But anyways, that was my idea for the first game. I think it would be ideal if the battle mechanics and some of the other mechanics that I didn't mention were not too dissimilar from the EU4 style, since I think the game does get it right most of the time, but it's just some specific aspects that really could be improved upon. As for the second game, I'm not really going to talk too much about it because it is building a whole new game from the ground up, and I'm not really qualified for that, but some things that I would really like to see would be Enlightenment principles. And what I imagine for that is that maybe there could be some sort of an idea tech tree that advances in 2 separate ways, both without using any mana, of course, since that was pretty annoying in Europa. One could be a pro-enlightenment way, and one could be a sort of anti-enlightenment way. And these trees could give different bonuses and mechanics that kind of let you play the game in 2 separate ways. I would also like to see an industrialization mechanic and an urbanization mechanic. It could work like something in Victoria 2, where if you started to play as an uncivilized nation, you had to get points to civilize yourself. But instead of building up a bar and just clicking a button, you could get points for it by implementing new tech into your army and using that tech to win battles. You could build manufactories and urban areas. As for exploring, I'd want to see mechanics similar to EU4's Explore feature, but instead of discovering the map, you would discover new things. And instead of conquistadors, we could have innovators, who you would be able to interact with by funding them or assigning missions. They would discover things like, for example, bacteria, which could maybe provide a pop growth boost in urban areas. And as you technologically advance, it would be easier and easier to influence nations that haven't advanced as far. There could also be a dynamic revolutions mechanic as the game progresses into the late stage. There could be social inequality, economic hardships, and influences from other Enlightenment countries that could contribute to a revolution spawning. We could also have historical events like the American Revolution or the French Revolution, and ideally there would be different types of revolutions that have different goals and a different set of mechanics. Certain types of revolutions could also spread beyond just the borders of the nation where it spawns, and it could either inspire or threaten the neighboring countries. There could also be a mechanic that lets you use diplomatic or espionage efforts to influence revolutionary ideals in your rival nations, and you could side with revolutionary countries. Well, now that I've talked about all this, you can see how unrealistic it would be to expect this from Paradox, but just consider this. If they split a potential sequel to EU4 into two separate games, focusing on their separate historical period, it could offer a way better gameplay experience for both those eras. It would avoid stretching the history too thin, and it would keep the game fresh and engaging. So anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm sure you have something to improve upon this, or you could even call me an idiot. Let's get a discussion going. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Or don't do any of that. I can pretend like I don't care. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care. Have a fantastic day.